David's been very successfully moving us into the future. And David, bear with me for a moment, because I want to take us into the past. And this morning I was so happy when so many hands went up, because what I want to take you to is the 60s. It was a time of activism, a time of those of us who were in their 20s truly believed we were going to change the world. I know it's a bit of a stretch, but I was one of those. And if you can picture me as a young, long pigtailed, 20-year-old in a small room with two professors, I can share why I'm still standing here with high ideals and passionate and belief that we can transform education. The setting was my oral exams, and I had to convince the professors that I was graduating with the skills to enter the profession and do well. I'd been through a pilot program that managed to change me from being a good student who studied what I was supposed to study and did well on tests to a true lifelong learner. We were asked to develop our own curriculum, follow our passions, and develop an in-depth research on something that was of meaning to us. Because of that experience, to this day, I attack new learning experiences with a vengeance and feel empowered to do so. At the end of the orals, one of the professors asked me what my philosophy of education was. I thought for a moment, because I hadn't expected that question at all, and I slowly started out talking about what was a passion to me at the time, a need to change society, the need for an educational system that modeled democracy, giving students the skills and dispositions to live in a democratic society, teaching them how to make decisions with critical thinking, and recognizing all students as unique and special individuals with very important voices. Before I knew it, I'd gotten so worked up, I was pounding on the professors' desks and talking about what I was going to do. The two professors looked at each other, smiled, and one of them looked at me and gave me the best piece of advice I'd ever been given. With a mixture of pity and a fatherly tone, he looked at me and said, "Becky, you'll never survive with those ideals unless you find yourself a community of believers." Fortunately, I've found them. And now I've found a community of believers in the Sarasota Institute. Believers that are committed to making the world a better place, believers that are dedicated to finding solutions, and believers who want to support others in doing that. Let's take a look at the mission of the Institute. The Sarasota Institute is a 21st century think tank considering solutions to the big questions facing Sarasota, the world, and the United States today. We're fortunate at the Sarasota Institute to have founders who are internationally known thinkers, futurists, lecturers, and writers. But when it comes to solutions and making things happen in the world, we need all of you to be part of making that difference. Our next step at the Sarasota Institute is to publish a white paper that's come from this conference, and then that will be a part of shaping our next steps, and we need you to help us do it. To start the process, I'd like you to turn to a neighbor and reflect on just one thing that was of meaning to you today. And I quote, many of you know John Dewey is synonymous with experience in education, and he stated, "We do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience." So let's just take a couple of minutes very quickly and answer the question with your neighbor, what was of meaning to you today, and write it on your index card. We're going to collect it, and all of these comments are going to become part of shaping the white paper. You are part of the Sarasota Institute. So turn to your neighbors, talk about what's of meaning, write it on the card, and on the way out, we'll be collecting cards. Okay, let's move on. We've heard today how difficult it is to transform education, and there's many obstacles. The biggest one is a question that I'm sure is dreaded by every administrator and president in this room. Haven't we been here before? That keeps us from moving forward, and we get stuck, saying we've done this before, haven't we been here before, and it gives us an excuse not to move forward. I want to answer the question. Absolutely yes, we've been here before. And absolutely no. And I want to share my argument as to why we are living in a very unique time right now, and we haven't been here before. Let me first share the yes part. We've been here before in terms of theory and philosophy. Throughout the day, we've heard about and seen wonderful examples of developing lifelong learners, innovators, young adults who can create their own jobs, think critically and creatively, and solve real-life problems. I can remember teaching a course on critical and creative thinking for graduate students. It was back in the 80s. And it was a movement in education then, but not new. As we studied philosophers through the centuries, many had been advocating for the very things we've heard today. Listen and see if some of these ideas don't ring a bell. As early as 400 BC, Socrates was saying, schools should be instrumental in creating social change and reform. Students learn best through active inquiry and experiential learning. Students should be given choice around their own learning. Students should be taught in a democratic environment in a preparation for citizenship. And we think we're being innovative right now and creative. Moving forward into the 1800s, Montessori was teaching, learning is natural for children. They should be given freedom to do so. The role of the educator is to remove obstacles in the environment for learning. Classroom materials should include practical life activities, and students should be given choice in activities and move at their own individual pace. Around the same time, father of progressive education, John Dewey, students learn best through hands-on experience. Preparation for democracy requires learning in a democratic environment. Students learn when they connect current knowledge to past experiences. An integrated curriculum encourages the students to pursue their own interests and develop lifelong learning skills. And from present-day philosophers and educators, there's Becky, who's created a comprehensive program called Habits of Mind that teaches and defines 16 dispositions that equip students with what people used to call the soft skills, and I heard it mentioned today. I would make an argument, it's not the soft skills anymore, it's the essential skills. It's skills such as empathy, flexible thinking, persistence, and applying knowledge. She's also written a book on personalized learning and the use of habits of mind. There's David Hirely, who's developed visual teaching tools for developing thinking skills in students, and Tony Wagner, who writes prolifically about the development of innovators, and Howard Gardner, who started Project Zero at Harvard and developed a new definition of intelligence, and Knowledge Works that we've heard from today through Catherine, and Lori Malaguzzi, who's given us the highly successful early childhood Reggio Emilia approach. Yes, there's a good argument that we have been here throughout the decades in terms of theory and philosophy of students' learning. The fact is, we know what is best for students, and we have. However, the answer to haven't we been here before is also an adamant no. Education today is very similar to climate change. We've had advice through the decades and even warnings. Yes, we've even made progress through the years, but not anywhere nearly enough. Although we've been here before, we're facing a new complexity of changes. Now more than ever, we need to call upon the classics about what works and what we know about meaningful pedagogy and contextualize it to today's world. We are at a critical crossroads in a very different context. I would go so far as to say that similar to climate change, we're talking an educational crisis in our country. We're talking about survival of higher education as it exists today, survival of democracy, and survival of our students having productive and satisfying lives. Let me review a few things we've heard today about the current context of education that supports my statement that students will be faced with very different conditions in 2035. We hear all the time from David, the pace of change has accelerated. And I've heard from him different figures, but the most recent is in the next 20 years, there will be more change than any 50 to 100-year period in history. We've heard from Lucy about higher education reaching non-affordability. And we're hearing all questions in all directions about the value of higher education. Alternatives to higher education are already emerging. Certificates, online coursework, blended learning. Students are educating themselves. They're ahead of us. They don't need us anymore. Homeschooling is increasing. It's estimated that the homeschooling population has been continuing to grow at an estimated 2 to 8% per year over the previous years. Preparation for jobs now needs to be learning how to learn. Corporations are not just hiring people who are skilled. They're hiring people who know how to learn and relearn because they know they're going to have to in their very own company over the future years. We know about digital disruption. The kids have left us. I've heard from David about a teacher shortage. What would be of great consternation to our founders who were adamant that an educated population was essential to preserve democracy is there's a commitment to democracy is waning. According to a research paper, only 30% of millennials believe that it's essential to live in a democracy, compared to 72% of those born before World War II. And internationally, in an article in the Journal of Democracy, across numerous countries, including Australia, Britain, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Sweden, and the United States, the percentage of people who say it is essential to live in a democracy has plummeted. and it is especially low among younger generations. As we were warned by Robert Hutchins, the death of democracy is not likely to be an assassination from ambush. It will be a slow extinction from apathy, indifference, and undernourishment. We're there right now. In short, we're experiencing chaos. Fortunately, one of our characteristics as humans is the ability to see things from different perspectives. Rather than view what is happening today as obstacles, we can look at them as an opportunity. In short, out of chaos comes order. And I'm a fan of Margaret Wheatley's, and I love one of her quotes: "Change always involves a dark night when everything falls apart. Yet if this period of disillusion is used to create new meaning, then chaos ends and new order emerges." It's up to all of us here to shape that new order. And there are several factors that are different today that have me optimistic that this could be the time to make the changes that are made and needed. This is why I say we haven't been here before. There are several factors that haven't been available to us in previous decades. We know more, and it's been mentioned today a couple times, from brain research and how it informs teaching and learning. I recommend highly an article that's been written recently and published by Pamela Cantor from Turnaround for Children and a group of researchers, and it's called Key Findings and Implications of the Science of Learning and Development. Research shows us that habits of mind can be taught. Materials exist to teach skills necessary for 2035. But above all, I think our country is feeling an urgency. We also have a greater acceptance for a need to change, a strong force building to preserve democracy, and we've heard talk of diversity today. There's so many gifts of diversity, but from my perspective, it has forced us to think the way we want to teach our children to think. We've had to think sometimes out of the box, creatively, critically, and a different way of thinking. It's up to us to be part of creating the new order. Rather than feeling overwhelmed by the crisis, we can seize it as an opportunity. It could be the gift that many of us have been waiting for. I've been waiting for 50 years. If not now, who? Just think of the resources that exist in this room. University presidents, heads of foundations, professors, each of you has a commitment to education and making a difference and a platform to do it. The Sarasota Institute is trying to figure out how to be most useful in supporting the transformation of education. And you can be a large part today in guiding this process. You can help shape the future by just taking a few minutes, your card again, talk to your neighbors, and discuss what you'd like to commit to changing in education and what resources the Sarasota Institute might provide to support you. Write it on your index card, and we'll be asking them to be handed in on the way out. And we'll spend some time taking a look at those needs. See if there's a consistent pattern, seeing where the needs are, and following up on those needs. This can be as comprehensive as changing of the culture of a school district or university, to tutoring a student, or speaking to a neighbor about the need to transform what we are doing. We'd like to understand what needs exist here in Sarasota. To quote Anne Frank, How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. Just take a few moments now and answer this question on your card. Okay. I'd like to acknowledge that being an agent of change in education isn't easy. Our current model was developed in response to the industrial age with a factory model. As a society, we have moved out of the industrial age decades ago, but our model of schooling hasn't changed. It's very entrenched. Efforts to transform can involve standing alone, facing failure, and most commonly, fatigue. But it also brings great joy, and most important of all, it involves living an undivided life, full of the kind of energy that is created when we are whole. The reason we want students to be innovators and empowered is so they can lead lives of meaning, making a difference in the world. One of the most powerful ways to teach students this way of life is to provide them with the adult role models in their life. You need to live a life of meaning, following your passions and acting on your beliefs. Let me share a story that illustrates what might support those who are deeply involved in transforming education. It's written by a poet, David White, when he was in one of his lower moments about what he was doing. David was sitting with a monk, also named David. He looked at him and said, "Brother David, tell me about exhaustion." The monk looked at him with an acute searching for the briefest of moments, as if trying to sum up the entirety of the situation, and without missing a beat, as if he had been waiting all along to say a life-changing thing to him. The monk answered in the form of a question and an assertion. You know what the antidote to exhaustion is not necessarily rest? The antidote to exhaustion is not necessarily rest, David repeated, as if he might exhaust himself completely before he reached the end of the sentence. What is it? The monk responded, the antidote to exhaustion is wholeheartedness. You are so tired through and through because a good half of what you do here in this organization has nothing to do with your true powers or the place you have reached in your life. You are only half here, and half here will kill you after a while. You need something to which you can give your full powers. You know what that is, and I don't have to tell you. All of us here need to be clear about what we believe is best for students and unafraid to act on those beliefs. We can no longer behave on the outside in contradiction to what we know on the inside. For decades, we've known what is best for our students. But we have continued to make the best of living with archaic practices. If we want survival for our educational institutions and lives of meaning for our students, we need the will and intention to act with urgency. We cannot stand by, and we at the Sarasota Institute are not standing by. Parting words for those of you who are going out and fighting the good fight. Do not be dismayed by the brokenness of the world. All things break, and all things can be mended. Not with time, as they say, but with intention. So go, love intentionally, extravagantly, and unconditionally. The broken world waits in darkness for the light that is you. Thank you.